Hello, you're watching TelecomTV Spotlight on 5G series. Time now for our strategy outlook discussion on 5G RAN. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content for TelecomTV, and based on our editorial coverage of the sector, we've identified the key areas generating the most interest and that could impact the strategic choices of telcos and their partners. For example, is there a compelling role for mmWave? Can small cells really help with 5G densification? And when will we see the RIC deployed? Well, let's find out what our guests think. And joining us on the programme today are Franz Seiser, who is Vice President of Access Disaggregation at Deutsche Telekom, Shabbir Bagasrawala, Head of Go-to-Market at Rakuten Symphony, Geetha, Worldwide Head of Open RAN in the Communications Technology Group at Hewlett Packard Enterprise, Gilles Garcia, Senior Director Business Lead Communications Group at Xilinx, and Randy Cox, Head of Product Management Intelligent Cloud at Wind River. Hello everyone, very good to see you all. Thanks so much for taking part in our discussion today. Let me start by focusing on Open RAN. Unsurprisingly, given the amount of interest in this, have attitudes to Open RAN evolved or changed in the past year? Randy, perhaps I could bring you into the conversation first on this one.
I would say we've seen an increased activity over the last year in terms of Open RAN, and really falls into three categories. I would say first, we've seen an increase in commercial engagements and real deployments. Right now, Wind River has 5 commercial engagements, and we have a few more in the works as we speak. We're the only vendor in the world with a production deployed vRAN solution in North America, tier 1 operator carrying live traffic. And so we're very proud of that. This is a scaled deployment and they continue to expand. So I think that's number one, our real live deployments. I think number two, we've seen an increase in RFPs requiring O-RAN compliancy. So another area where we've seen the attitude be more aggressive, if you will, in O-RAN. Almost every RFP that we get requires O-RAN compliancy, or at least is requesting updates on that. And then lastly, I would say we see an increase in the amount of integration and testing going on between partners as O-RAN progresses in the market.
Great, thanks very much, Randy. Geetha, what are you seeing? Are you seeing if operators' key concerns have changed over the last year?
Yeah, first of all, once again, thank you, Guy and TelecomTV for having me on this panel. The answer to the question is absolutely yes. So far, we have deployed with our tier 1 carrier in the US nearly about, I would say about 10 to 12,000 sites carrying live traffic. And it used to be that a couple of years ago, it was just this one carrier at the forefront of things, and others were just in a wait and see mode. Their concerns were very much, TCO related. I'm not saying that they're not TCO related today, but it was very much at a very high level, superficial level of TCO. Price, give me the right price for the hardware, give me the right price for the software type of thing. Always comparing what carriers had or have currently, the appliance world to the disaggregated world, and saying, how do I make it the same as the appliance world? How do I get everything the same in terms of power, performance, price, etc. That has evolved with a lot more understanding to the operations side of the house. And how do I make it work? Now the operations teams are involved. And I always say to people that when the operations people are involved, when people who actually are ultimately responsible for, making sure that this is up and running and works in the field, when they are involved, the operator is serious. And their concerns with respect to integration of the various components, because the disaggregated world is very complicated. And then how do we make sure that there is automated management of everything from deployment to management of the various general purpose compute platforms, software, all the way up the stack. How do we do it in an automated way? All of these are operations concerns. And these concerns, the concerns at the back end, the deployment and management, is becoming more and more prevalent. So good news is that, it is the right path to be on, because these are the things we need to worry about. The challenging thing is, these areas that they're asking, for answers for are very, very complicated.
Thank you, Geetha. I'll come to Gilles in a minute, but Franz, let me first of all, ask you: are key concerns changing, and in particular, has the attitude towards Open RAN changed or evolved?
So our attitude has clearly not changed. So we have been convinced this is the way to go roughly 2 years ago when we started the journey, and even longer time ago when we started to work in ORAN Alliance and the organization that finally ended up to be ORAN Alliance. We are still convinced. We got very deep on the technology the last 2 years. That made us just more convinced this is the right thing to go. We didn't find any. Of course, we came across many challenges, but we found solution, and we know how to overcome the topics. So from that perspective, from our side, all still as it has been 2 years ago, fully convinced. What has changed a bit is the attitude in the industry. Exactly how we hoped it to be. Remember, we started that because we wanted to bring in new players. We wanted to drive more innovation, more competition. We see that happening. We see new companies entering the markets over the last year. I talked to numerous companies in different stages of development. Not everything we have seen is ready for prime time yet, but I expect some pretty significant announcements later this year to come. So from that perspective, the attitude got more positive from my position. Yes, of course, there are still some people out there who still have their doubts, and that's good, because you can listen to them, see what are their concerns, is that addressed, what need you to do, and security is just one of these topics. So this criticism always helps to get better. But bottom line, I think this is fully on track, and then we are still highly convinced this is exactly the thing we have to do.
Thank you very much, Franz. And Gilles, let me come across to you for some comments about whether you're seeing key concerns changing.
Yeah, we have seen an evolution in France and from the operators. He was talking about it, seeing the maturity as well about the different components that need to be put together so that the ORAN and Open RAN can be deployed by the operators. And so we have seen most of the operators having technology group spending a lot of time to understand how can the technology help them to achieve the goals that the Open RAN and the ORAN are supposed to achieve. Franz talk about innovation, but we need to talk also about green aspect from the power consumption, from the performance. Is the technology used on the Open RAN radios, ODUs? Will this allow the operators to achieve the performance and the same performance that they were achieving in the past? And so I think that this has been proven that from performance, technology, power consumptions, and the way the operators can use this technology and those systems fitting better within their architecture and the way to monetize these, I think this has changed the mentality. And now this is showing with the deployment that we are starting to see and that we will see more and more, the maturity of the Open RAN. And again, it's still a journey, but that's the big change we have seen in the past 12 to 16 months from now.
Yeah, thank you, Gilles. And hopefully we'll come and focus on sustainability and green power later in our discussion. But for now, one of the most talked about aspects of Open RAN is the RAN Intelligent Controller, the RIC. Now, it promises a lot, maybe too much, but when do we think we might start to see the use of the RIC in 5G networks? And not just in Open RAN, in more legacy 5G networks. Shabbir, perhaps I could come to you first on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. So the RIC, right, is one component of the Open RAN journey, right, that operators are undertaking. If you look at what is happening with operators today, right? Like Geetha said, right, we're going from RFI stages and RFP stages to now rolling up our sleeves and trying to deploy Open RAN. So in terms of the RIC, there are multiple components to that. There is the platform, there is the software and the digital transformation, the decisions around the cloud transformation that operators need to make. And we're seeing a bevy of these, transformations that are happening today, right? Like operators are looking at this in silos. From our perspective, we believe that that operators have to start investing in these changes. These silos have to come together, right? The multi-vendor, the disaggregation of the hardware and the software, the cloud transformation, as well as the RIC. And this is where like we're working with a lot of operators today to see what is that platform's approach that we need to take with them, so that they can start this digital transformation from their perspective. I believe it will take a few months for operators to go from the siloed approach of Open RAN to now looking at it from a holistic network perspective. And once they start looking at cloud and digital transformation at that holistic level, we'll see this change happening at both the Open RAN vendors as well as the incumbent vendors.
Thank you very much for that, Shabbir. Well, let me throw an additional question in here. I'm moving on slightly from the RIC, and it's very relevant to what we've just been talking about. And that is, how have operators been working with the hardware and software vendors? Are we talking more of a hands-on or hands-off approach here? Geetha, hands-on or hands-off, and is this likely to change?
I think there are more, the good news, I think there are more hands-on as opposed to being, hands-off and saying, okay, I need everything disaggregated and all of you work together and bring this to me. I see more and more of a hands-on approach from the operators, which is a great thing, because they're looking at all of the aspects and saying, okay, all of these things are not just going to magically happen. All of these things are not going to come together magically for me. So I need to get involved, and I need to at least strategically give the appropriate directions to the appropriate, hardware, software players. And then I need to bring, at least conceptually, all of these parties together, which is a great thing. Just to build on Shabbir's point earlier about the RIC, I mean, there's all of these things like, whether you take class 2 pooling, you take RIC, the SMO, all of these newer features and functionalities. Now, someone has to kind of look at it, overarchingly and say, okay, how is this going to happen? Multi-vendor approach, multi-vendor RAN approach is one NEP going to just take it upon themselves to support all of their other competitors? Probably not. And so how does that all come together, and how is that all brought together for an operator? I mean, that's where we need the operators to be hands-on. And the good news is they are getting a lot more involved.
Thanks very much, Geetha. Well, I think we all want to contribute to this question. So let me go first of all to Franz. I'm sure a hands-on approach is advocated by you.
So actually, I think for me, this is straightforward. Disaggregation and hands-off simply does not work. If you want to build that, then you have to be hands-on. Why? If you're hands-off, that means you give someone else the responsibility to do all this integration work. Today, we call these type of companies system integrators. Of course you can do, but then you just exchange the login to a classical supplier to a login to the system integrator. If this is the way to go, I don't know. Now, does that mean you need to do everything hands-on? Yeah, of course not. And I think we will see different approaches, how much responsibility operators take versus how much they do give, at least in parts, to others, integrators, or however we want to call them. And it will be interesting to see what does this mean to flexibility, to speed, and bottom line, of course, also to cost.
Thanks, Franz. And Gilles, what's your view on this?
Again, Franz explained it very nicely, but I think that the overarching reason for the hands-on is because at the end, the operators are deciding the disaggregation, and they are designing the disaggregation in their network. So they need to make sure that these disaggregation, Open RAN, O-RAN, are put together in such a way that they can deliver and monetize the new networks and the new Open RAN that they will get out of this ecosystem that they are building together to make money. Because again, at the end, it's not a question of, oh, I want to have Open RAN for XYZ. At the end, they need to be able to leverage and to monetize this infrastructure. And so I think that having the operator hands-on, and we are seeing that all over the world as soon as there is Open RAN in one shape or form, some are more, some are a little bit less, but they want at the end to be able to monetize the architecture that they're putting in place. And so for that, they need to be hands-on.
Yeah, excellent. And as you rightly say there, it's degrees of hands-on. Some want to be a lot hands-on, some not so much. Randy, let me come across to you now.
Sure, thank you. As I look at real live deployments, certainly the carriers are hands-on. And I think we're demonstrating that today. While they are hands-on, we also as partners have to take on the responsibility of our individual engagement with the rest of the partners. But in our real live deployment in North America, where we have thousands of sites and nodes deployed, we're working directly with the carrier as well as our partners in that engagement on a regular basis. So there are no silos here. We're fully transparent in terms of the engagement, whether it be HPE, whether it be Intel, Wind River as the cloud platform, and then Samsung, for example, for RAN software. That's as an example. But I see this in other areas of the world where we're working together with the partners along with the operator, shoulder to shoulder. And I think that's going to be required as we go forward.
Yeah, thank you very much, Randy. And Shabbir, did you want to come in with some thoughts there on the relationship you're seeing there between the vendors, partners, and operators?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from the operator community perspective, right, we certainly have some thought leaders who are making that investment to be hands-on, right? And then there are some operators who are still kind of slow and waiting for that change to happen. But it's an important factor that operators have to think about, right? In terms of, do they want to be that change agent, to implement the speed of change that they want in their networks? I think Franz Seiser mentioned, right, that this is the way to go forward. We see that digital transformation, the software, the cloud aspects. So in that perspective, operators really have to invest in this, and the learnings in terms of what they get from that investment is just great, right? Like, I mean, the learnings in terms of the security, the interfaces, the integration aspects, and even the blueprints that they use, right? Open RAN opens up the possibility of an unlimited number of permutations and combinations, but there are certain number of requirements that the operator has to define for that blueprint to come together. And from our perspective, that's extremely important, right? It's a consultative approach that we take with operators to understand what are those requirements and defining that specific blueprint that meets that requirement.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody, for those comments. Well, moving on to some specific areas of the RAN. My next question, is there a compelling role for mmWave in 5G networks? Because this has been something of a roller coaster, but I do feel we're starting to see more compelling use cases emerge now. Gilles, what's your thoughts on mmWave?
I think that the roller coaster is the right analogy that you can see with the mmWave. 3 to 4 years ago, everybody was seeing mmWave rock growing, and so things calmed down. Some operators were talking about it, some others were not. A little bit like the Open RAN and the O-RAN, the technology is there. The products are there. And I think that now the use case is now that operators have started to deploy their first wave of 5G, they are starting to realize the subsidiary, they are starting to realize use cases and hotspots where mmWave is fitting very well. We are starting to see with the engagement that we have enterprise as a big way for the mmWave, because this is where the big pipe, and let's talk about big pipe for mmWave, or the bandwidth improvement that mmWave is bringing. can really help the operators to, again, monetize their investment. And so we are seeing these in different regions of the world. We are seeing engagement in North America. EMEA is a little bit behind, but we are starting a lot of, I will not say excitement, but discussion around it. Japan is also moving up in the opportunities on the millimeter wave. That was not the case 2 years ago from what we were saying. So enterprise is, for what we are saying, driving the main use case that we are seeing for the millimeter wave. The other one is also complementing for specific hotspots in main cities that can, how to address a big mall into the center of a city. A millimeter wave pipe could be the right way to address that. So we will see adjustment about how the operators are using millimeter wave, where they need large bandwidth to address not probably a large number of end users from this pipe, but big agglomeration, big sites where there is a lot of users that will need at the end to reach out through a big pipe.
Thank you, Gilles. That's good to hear. Unless we've got any other comments on millimeter wave specifically, I do want to move on. So let's move on to another aspect of the RAN, and that's around small cells. Small cells have been around for a very long time, and perhaps they haven't had the impact that we once thought they would. Again, like the roller coaster of millimeter wave, are small cells now up to the task, do we think, of helping with 5G densification? Shabbir, what's your thoughts on this?
So you're right. Like 4G, and there was small cells. There was specific use cases for small cells in terms of that last mile coverage. Maybe to some extent for densification. But for 5G, the way I see small cells is really going to be about multiple aspects, right? One is absolutely densification. So a lot of operators right now are focused on the macro coverage. They're looking at getting, the main cities and getting that 5G symbol on your phone, right? But I think as a next level, right, operators are going to start looking at densification through maybe outdoor small cells. And then at the next level, right, and these conversations have already begun, where a lot of operators are looking at small cells where they don't need those high power radios, for specific use cases, right, like enterprise use cases. Millimeter wave is being considered for small cells as well. So just because of the path loss implications. So in that sense, we're going to look at two different approaches for small cells. One is for that last mile coverage, the densification. And then the second use case would be targeting specific use cases like enterprise or specific applications for low latency for indoor coverage. So I think small cells does have a place. It will be the next wave after the macro coverage has been completed from the operator perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Shabbir. Maybe the time really has come this time with 5G. Any other thoughts on small cells? Otherwise, let us move on. We touched on this earlier, and Gilles, you touched on green power. So I want to come on to sustainability and ask, are we seeing sufficient progress on low power, low carbon initiatives in the RAN? For example, power management or silicon innovations. And Randy, let me start by asking you first.
Yes, I think the importance of having a lower power consumption solution, lower footprint at the edge is incredibly important. And so that really comes down to, at the server level and at the chipset level, the amount of number of cores that we need and actually operate. And at least from a Wind River perspective, we pride ourselves on the fact that we have the lowest number of cores in use in terms of our cloud platform in the industry. And I think this is going to become incredibly important as we go forward. I think, as we all know, that power consumption at the edge of a network for an operator is incredibly important because of the scaling and the number of sites being deployed across their network. And so right now I see that as kind of a table stakes in some sense, but we need to continue to progress further to getting to a single core as we move forward.
Great, thanks very much, Randy. Let me come to Gilles first, because you mentioned this in an earlier answer. Are operators, are your customers demanding faster innovations in what you deliver?
Yes, but let me answer one of your questions, which is the silicon innovation is really driving the power down. And we are seeing that across the silicon industry. We are all paranoid about how can we integrate more, consume less, so that we can provide more value to the system vendors and at the end to the operators. We have a lot of discussion about the radio. On the radio, we are spending a lot of time and money to invest and to integrate more to reduce the number of components into the radios. And so now we are down to some radios that need probably a radio device and some PAs attached to it, and that's it. When you are talking about the DU, the distributed unit side, Randy was talking about the number of cores used. That's something which is very important for the operators, and this is why we are seeing accelerators coming into play to offload some software functions that are better done by dedicated silicon instead of using CPUs that can be used for other things or can be removed and used lower cost systems for those Open RAN distributed unit. So clearly, from a silicon perspective, this is one of the mojo that we have for the roadmap, and Xilinx is clearly involved. I can tell you that AMD is also focusing a lot on those from the processor side as well.
Great, thanks for that update, Gilles. Franz, what's your thoughts here?
In days like these, where climate is on top of everyone's brain, I mean, you can't ask for enough power reduction and power efficiency. I think it's a complete no-brainer. We see progress, and that's good. And what's so special is simply the sheer economies of scales, because you have tens of thousands of sites, 3 sectors, multiple frequency layers. And if you just manage to save 1 watt per sector, per frequency layer, this immediately adds up to incredible number of power savings. So there is a lot of potential in there, and we are asking for a lot. We have done some first studies, starting to use state-of-the-art mechanisms versus what was available one generation before, and we see tremendous results. And of course, I expect that to even accelerate, as we now also see more competition coming in on the hardware and chipset level. And the competition is always good. By the way, this was one of the ideas of Open RAN. So I expect we will see a couple of step changes at least every 12 months.
Yes, let's hope so, Franz. As you say, competition is certainly good and healthy for the industry. I think this could be our last question because we're running out of time, but I'd like to go across to Shabbir for some comments on green power as well.
Yeah. So, I think a lot of the industry focuses on the silicon innovation, but we also have to think about the baseband unit, right? Which is typically in traditional networks and with 4G, we had those basebands at the bottom of the tower, right at the edge. So, in terms of baseband innovation, I think what I'm excited from an Open RAN perspective is the transformation of that baseband into a cloud-based RAN, right? And that's where we can do some exciting software changes, where we don't need to always pre-provision and have that baseband running for all the frequency layers and for all the radios. So in terms of a cloud approach, and this is sort of pioneered already in the IT and the web industry, right? It's based on per demand. You ramp up your resources and you ramp down your resources. So in terms of a cloud approach, I see a lot of transformation happening with a lot of operators who are incorporating these concepts, right, where they don't pre-provision for the maximum capacity or the peak traffic conditions all the time, where they can bring down networks, bring down radios, bring down certain frequency layers in terms of low traffic conditions. They can look at pooling gains and overall, chase after every watt, as Franz mentioned, try to save every watt possible.
Thank you very much for that, Shabbir. And Geetha, some final comments from yourself.
Yeah, Power consumption is a tricky thing because some of my colleagues here talked about, making sure that components are integrated and, making sure that it is optimized to lower the power consumption, right? It's a tricky thing that we're noticing when we bring everything together in a server, that you could easily go from, in the name of power consumption, you could easily go all the way back to where we were, which is the appliance mode, which is something that we don't want. We still want the disaggregated, the overarching thing, which is the open RAN and the disaggregated network architecture and so on. And at the same time, we want to bring all of the components together in a server with the software, everything, that whole pod or that whole unit, if you will, has to have the lower power consumption. So this is something that we need to keep in mind. And I think all of us, I'm sure, will be in agreement to that. And that's what HP is trying to do, is making sure that we work with all of our partners to make sure that the overall hardware infrastructure system, which includes all the way up to the OS CAS layer, is power efficient, and we constantly tune each of the components and system as a whole to keep the power consumption down.
Thank you, Geetha. And we'll quickly go back to Randy for final comments from Randy.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, and she did just mention that, but it's coming back to this discussion around how we work with our partners and how much progress we can make when we're really shoulder to shoulder with them, as I mentioned before. I think we have a strategic partnership with Intel, and we're working closely with them as well as HPE to be able to optimize the power consumption as best we can from a software perspective, but working in close conjunction with the hardware providers as well. So this is where the partnerships come into most importance.
Great, thanks very much. And it's great to see this level of innovation in the RAN, and there's plenty more innovation still to come. However, we must leave our discussion there. Thank you all very much for taking part in the programme today and sharing your views. If you're watching this on day 2 of our Spotlight on 5G series, then please stay with us and take a look at the rest of our programmes on 5G RAN. On Monday, we looked at the 5G core. Later in the week, we'll cover Edge and private 5G, and finally, the 5G cloud. Plus, we have lots more related content, including the latest news from MWC in the Daily Slice programme, when I'll be joined from Barcelona by my colleague Ray Lemaitre. Next week, we'll see the return of the After Show, our live Q&A programmes, so don't forget to send us your questions on 5G RAN, and there's a Q&A form right here on the website. A final reminder to tune in to The Slice for the very latest news from MWC in Barcelona. For now though, thank you for watching and goodbye.